I'm oral historian Mike Chappell. Today, May 28, 2013, we're at the Endocrine Society's headquarters in Chevy Chase, Maryland, where I'll be interviewing Scott Hunt, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Endocrine Society. Scott, would you tell me a little bit about your family background?
Yeah, my mom immigrated from Scotland. She was in Paisley, right outside of Glasgow, and she came over in the teens with her mom and dad, who lived with us for my whole childhood. So the place was full of Scottish burrs for my whole growing up. My dad was USA, American, and we lived in Newark, New Jersey, which now is has some ill repute, but at the time was fine. It was where many of the Scots and Irish immigrated, and true to that, my uncle was a fireman, and so we were I grew up in that kind of a very middle class, even lower middle class environment.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My mom worked for a physician. She was the office manager for an otolaryngologist, actually, in Short Hills, New Jersey. And my dad was a salesman. He sold industrial finishes, varnishes, and so on for industrial uses.
And what kind of education did they have?
Neither of them went to college, so I was the first to go to college.
And you said back then Newark was a nice place to live. What?
It was okay. It was a little rough. There were some areas that you didn't want to be in, but it was fine. You know, at that time, you just managed. You made do. If there were some rough characters, you found a way to deal with that. It was okay.
What type of education did you receive?
Well, I was very fortunate. My family found a way to get me into a New Jersey prep school called Newark Academy. And I think it's actually one of the oldest prep schools in the country. At the time, it went from first grade right through high school. And that's what I did. I went from first grade right through high school at this school. Very good school, very academically challenging, and good teachers, good program, good sports, fun to be there. I was a swimmer. I was actually captain of the swimming team at Newark Academy, and I enjoyed that. That was a good experience.
What kind of student were you?
I was a fair student. I would say I was probably a B+ student. So I give myself decent grades, but was often reminded that I could have worked harder.
Okay. And what about career interests at that time in prep school?
Well, it's a bit early, of course, but I did know that I really liked writing. I was a good writer, and I was also pretty good at math. So I had a little sense of creativity, and actually read a book in one of our English courses. It was by Vance Packard, and it was called The Hidden Persuaders. And this book actually had a great influence on me. It opened me up to the advertising and the marketing business, essentially, the business of persuading people, how to influence them. You know, what would be in an advertisement that might trigger responses in a way that was useful to a company that wanted to create that kind of a response. So I found this to be fascinating, and it actually piqued my interest in business, first of all, and I thought, great fun. And then I was sort of interested in mostly the advertising and the marketing side of business. That was the first, I think, when I was in high school.
Now, was that something you discussed with your teachers, or?
Yeah, actually, it was a topic of they were quite fascinated. I think they were probably horrified that I had found this book, which was supposed to be an expose of the marketing and advertising field. They were surprised that I found it so interesting, and I just found it to be a great treatise on commerce. It was just great fun.
Now, why did you choose to attend Lafayette College in Easton?
Yeah, well, as my mother reminded me, I didn't get into Princeton. So Lafayette was one of the other schools that was on my list, and it turned out to be a good choice for me. Relatively small, just I think 1,600 students at the time. And I was able to do well there. I was an American civilization major, which is kind of a history major. Thought about being an English major, didn't decide to pursue that. But in hindsight, maybe I should have done. That would have been a good choice for me. But
now, American civilization, American studies.
American studies, right?
That's more than history, though, right?
It is. It was an attempt to bring the social context of an era into the discussion. It was to examine the writers. It was to examine the politics, the great thinkers of the time. So it was a kind of comprehensive picture of American life, and it was approached at Lafayette by different decades. So for one semester, we would concentrate on the 30s, and we would go through the social aspects of the 30s and the writers and the important elements of that time.
Did you have any special contact with the faculty at the school?
I did. I think one of my closest, how can I say this, the instructor with whom I connected best was our English instructor. His name was Cleveland Yauk, and a great old Brahmin, and he really opened my eyes to rigorous writing and split infinitives and being sure that I was clear about my explanations. And I think he really he gave me a good structure for writing.
How about your interest in marketing and business?
Well, I actually attended a marketing event each of my last 2 years at Lafayette, and it was put on by the Advertising Club of New York. It was a week of immersion, and so we would visit with advertising agencies and we talked to some of the clients. We received presentations on different advertising campaigns, how they were structured, what the intent was, all different fields, airlines, toiletries, everything, and I just found it fascinating. So that further piqued my interest in marketing and business.
So your interest didn't dissipate while you were thinking about English, being an English major?
No,
right on through.
I really enjoyed it. It was great fun for me, and so I found it continuing to be stimulating.
Now, upon graduation, what type of career did you think you might
Well,
have for
what
yourself?
I thought I was going to be doing was carrying a rifle in Vietnam. That was my expectation. I was in ROTC. I was a distinguished military student, as it turned out. I did very well in ROTC. But I would have been infantry. But fortuitously, an unfortunate thing happened. I was in an automobile wreck in my senior year and have pins and so on in my hip. And so at the time, that was enough to disqualify me for being in the service, and particularly the infantry. So that didn't happen. So I was free to pursue a career. And at that time, I, of course, put my resume out. What kind of a resume can you have when you're just a college student? But I put one together and managed to land a job in New York City with the Nielsen Television Index, the TV ratings company. The full name was the A.C. Nielsen Company. And almost everybody knew of this organization. They still exist, of course. It still does audience response, audience research, and so on. But I went to work for them and had a great experience with them. So here's what that meant. That meant that I was putting together campaigns for companies that wanted to reach a particular demographic. So if you were interested in reaching upscale males, you'd want to have television programs in your advertising schedule that had the demographic of upscale males. And at the time, that probably meant you bought a lot of golf and you bought a number of other different sports types programs. The CBS Evening News was another one that had upscale males as a profile. So I put together these programs for advertisers, but it spoke to my arithmetic skills, it spoke to my ability to write, and the bonus was when you put together a schedule like this, you put it together with charted materials. And these are the old charts that you wrote out by hand, and I would have to present this content to the advertising agency and often the client. So if the client was Westinghouse, that was one of my clients, or Gillette, another one of my clients, I'd be presenting to Ted Bates, the agency, and then I'd be presenting later on to up in Boston at Gillette, or I'd be in New Jersey at Westinghouse. So, but I'm on my feet, having to make a presentation, and this was at 22, 23 years old, which at the time was rather unusual. I don't think it's so unusual in the sciences, where youngsters are often on their feet making presentations, but it was unusual for someone in a business circumstance to have to be up and speaking that early on. Great fun, though.
Why did you decide to get a master's of business?
Well, this was another fork in the road, if you will. I had done very well with Nielsen. I was on their fast track. I had actually was the youngest person they promoted to a client service exec, which means I was headed for a good position with Nielsen long term. So that looked like a pretty rosy future, but I could actually see it. I could look down the hall and I could see the office progression and where I'd be at the end. And it wasn't quite enough. I thought, let me take a crack at getting a good MBA and see if I can put together a program so that I can get a really good MBA. And if I can do that, then it would be worth leaving Nielsen. But it had to be a strong program. At the time, I wasn't exactly sure what I would be taking away from a master's in business administration. It was not a degree that has as much visibility now as it does now. Now people talk about an MBA quite frequently, but back then it was not as quite a common a degree. So I thought I'll take a crack at some of the better business schools, and so I applied to Wharton and to Columbia and to the Harvard Business School, and I was accepted at all of them, as it turns out. So I had great choices. But for me, the chance to go to Harvard was definitely the one I was interested in. I was interested in it for a couple of reasons. One of them was that it was the most qualitative of the business schools. Now, that meant that it was not entirely driven by mathematical analysis. I'm comfortable with math. I'm strong in that area. But I felt like what I was seeing about business made me feel that the softer side needed to be paid attention to. It needed to be understood. And I'm certain now in my career that that was a good decision, because I know now that all of my successes have been through people, through the people I work with, from the people I've learned from. That ability to understand a circumstance, understand the pressures in a circumstance, understand what's going on here, if you will, and to be able to relate to people and make the most of that has been invaluable. And I think the business school, oddly enough, was the place that really focused that for me. It was a great way to learn to think and a great way to take into consideration the subtleties, the nuance of a particular situation.
How did you keep up with your interest in marketing while you were at the...
Well, I was head of the marketing club at the business school, as it turns out. And so here's another one of my interests that sort of came to the fore. I love cars, as we'll develop in this conversation a little bit. You see a picture of a Porsche that I own behind me over my shoulder. I've always loved them. So when I was head of the marketing club, I decided that the speaker that I wanted to speak to the business school on marketing was Andy Granatelli. Now, you're laughing, Mike, because you recognize the name. Andy Granatelli was the guy who invented STP, which is this motor additive that you would put in your car, and it would supposedly make the engine run better, it would take care of things that went wrong, and so on. But he was a great spokesperson for this brand. He was the brand. When I picked him up at the airport, he told me, I'm the second most visible person in the media. I don't remember who the first was. It might have been Muhammad Ali or something. But his persona, big, heavy-set guy. And he was involved in all sorts of racing, stock car racing, sports car racing, and so on with this brand, STP. And he took one of these stickers, these, I think it's red, white, and blue STP stickers, and he slapped it on the back of my Mustang before he got in it. That thing stayed on the back of that Mustang until I finally sold the car. But he was a great speaker. He had such personality. He was really able to deliver a message. So marketing always stayed with me. It's always been part of what I've had fun with. And I think the people you meet in that area are kind of fun as well.
What was the ethos at the Harvard Business School in the 1960s?
Well, very good question, because the time, the 1960s, was a real radicalization of the country in many ways. You know, I would have been in Vietnam, but I wasn't by virtue of an automobile accident. But a lot of people had gone to Vietnam, and a lot of them were beginning to come home. And there was a great uproar. Many of the schools, Columbia was closed by a strike, and actually, and Harvard was closed by a strike in the, I guess it would have been 1968 or 69. And even the business school closed. And this is incredible. I mean, the business school never responded to social issues like that. I mean, it responded from a business point of view. You've got to deal with social issues, that kind of thing. But no, this was an actual decision that the business school had to go on strike. And so the classes were suspended for several weeks. We were expected to work on our own. We still had the cases. But there were no classes. We stopped meeting, and that semester was pass-fail, and previously it had been a much more extensive grading system. So even the business school at that time felt the pressure of Vietnam and Cambodia and the important social issue of the day.
How did that affect your career choices, or did it?
And it did actually affect my career choice. So I'm the marketing guy, right? And so expected to go to work in a marketing capacity. In fact, I had offers from Nielsen again. I had offers from Ogilvy and Mather, the advertising agency. I had offers from General Foods to go up to White Plains, New York, and sell U-Ban coffee. All of which were great fun and would have been fun to do for me, but I was pretty moved by the anti-war movement, and I was moved by my particular skills, and so I was recruited by HEW, that's the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, the, of course, predecessor to HHS, which is the current equivalent of that. HEW recruited me to come down and be one of its management specialists from business school. The administration at the time, it was the Nixon administration, was recruiting MBA types to come and help government implement a management by objectives kind of system. So I thought, here I can go on the inside and I can do some good from a social standpoint. You know, I can begin to give back. I can do work that I would find rewarding on an emotional level, as well as you know, from a career standpoint. Before I got to HEW, they changed the job, and they made me a special assistant to the Commissioner of Education, Sidney Marland, and I was head of the Office of Students and Youth. And I did that for about 18 months. And then the bureaucracy wore me down, and I didn't find that I was feeling as rewarded as I had hoped to be. So I began to decide what my next step would be. But my first job was very motivated by the social obligation that I wanted to take on.
And then why did you, well, you said why you left, but why did you go to the PBS?
So I went to the Public Broadcasting Service. That was my next job. Now here I thought to myself, wow, this will be nifty. I can go to work for a not-for-profit that is well-known, that does great work. You know, PBS, Sesame Street, the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, that kind of thing. I can use my Nielsen television background pretty effectively, and I can use the business school background, because I would expect, and it turned out to be true, that there needed to be a bit more of a business-like rigor at the Public Broadcasting Service. So I went there, and I was with the Public Broadcasting Service for almost 6 years, and here's what I did. I was their Director of Business and Finance. In other words, I was head of the finance and business side of Public Broadcasting Service. Then I became the head of marketing for the Public Broadcasting Service, and I marketed the downstream use of television programs in syndication out throughout the network of the public broadcasting stations, of which there were about 220. So I was part of the syndication and marketing. I was heading the syndication and marketing for the Public Broadcasting Service for a couple of years. So that was great fun. I enjoyed that. The career path in public broadcasting, however, was always going to be on the talent side. So if you were going to make it at the Public Broadcasting Service, you were probably one of the people who was a producer or somehow involved with the creative side of the business, not the business side of the business. And so I could see that this was eventually going to be limiting. It was not something that was going to take off for me at the Public Broadcasting Service, but it was great fun and a great experience. But I began to look for other places where the business side was going to be valued. As it turned out, I went to work for the American Association for Clinical Chemistry. This is, as it turns out, that's an association, but the Public Broadcasting Service was an association as well. It's Association of Public Television Stations. So I went from that association, PBS, to another association, the American Association for Clinical Chemistry. Now, why did I choose that?
A medical association.
A medical association. I went there because, again, I was able to use the media experience that I had. They were a major publisher in a field of medicine that was laboratory chemistry. They had a journal. They had the potential for other programs and products. I could see it. It was not being realized. And I had the chance to go there as the number 2. as their vice president and general manager. And the person in charge was actually a clinical chemist. He was a PhD clinical chemist. So I went in and using the audience research background that I'd had from Nielsen and then downstream with public broadcasting, I was able to look at their publication, see what could be developed out of that publication, the spin-off publication, which eventually happened. We were able to build an operating business out of their publishing activities. And we were able to enhance their other media, which was a physical media, which was a conference. We built their annual meeting, had been a trade show but relatively small, into the largest trade show in the world for the clinical laboratory. Now it's twice as big as it was when I left, but at the time it was still the biggest in the world with something like 800, 900 exhibit booths. I think now it has 17 or 1,800, so it's probably twice as big. But building that media, the physical media where you actually interact with someone, and building the print media, which was the journals and then the news magazine, was super. It was fun. It was a chance to get my chops, if you will, in another related business. And now I had made the third decision since business school to go for a not-for-profit organization. And as it turns out, I made one other, the one that I'm with now at the Endocrine Society. But much to my surprise, I ended up entirely in not-for-profit businesses ever since the Harvard Business School. I'm sure that's not a typical career path at the Harvard Business School.
You think a lot of that was your experience at Harvard, the radicalization you went through?
Well, that was the kickoff. Certainly, it was the kickoff. But no, eventually, it just struck me that this is a wonderful niche, a wonderful career niche for someone with good business skills and in an environment that needs these business skills, that doesn't typically get them. And so when you see this as a niche, it just draws you. You just say to yourself, wow, I can cut a swath through this. This can be great fun and can be rewarding. And I'm doing good work. That's nice too.
Now, why did you end up leaving the American Association for Clinical?
Well, I was there a long time. I was there 11 years. I made a lot of progress, a lot of successes, and so on. But then I was getting into my mid-40s, and my boss at the time, Ron Wharton, looked at me one day and he said, "It's about time you found the #1 job, don't you think?" And I didn't know if I was being shown the door or mentored, but it was the latter. And so I began more actively to look for a CEO job someplace, a #1 job. And those are hard to find. It takes a while to find that. There has to be a certain serendipity. But within about 6 or 8 months, a few opportunities presented themselves, and I was selected to be head of the Endocrine Society.
How did that come about? How were you recruited by the Endocrine Society?
Well, the Endocrine Society used a search firm to do it. They used the search arm of the American Society of Association Executives, ASAE. And this is sort of the professional society for people who work in my business, the association management business. And so ASAE had several consultants that worked in their search group. And they found me one way or another. I was often a speaker at programs of ASAE. I would speak about business approaches to this or non-dues revenue, different types of ways to improve the business circumstance of associations. So they knew me, they knew the work I did, they knew my reputation, and they knew the success I had had at American Association for Clinical Chemistry. So I was a good candidate, and as it turned out, I fit the bill for the Endocrine Society.
Prior to becoming Executive Director and CEO of the Endocrine Society, what was your initial assessment of the society?
Yeah, I felt, see, now I'm a business guy, so I came to this from the circumstance of having run a successful medical association. I was the number 2, but I was essentially the chief operating officer of this other group. So I took a look at the Endocrine Society from the standpoint of what are the activities of the society that can be grown and developed. And also from the interview process, I learned some of the interests and objectives of those people interviewing me for the society. So it was clear that the publishing program that they had was potentially a very big, very important publishing program. And I could see that. They had some limitations associated with their current outside publisher. They essentially outsourced the publishing of their journals. So I could see that as having high potential. I knew that their conference, the annual meeting, had potential as well. I didn't know how much because this was a different marketplace than I was used to from clinical chemistry, but it appeared as though there would be a good opportunity there as well. So I could see these 2 areas as having great potential, and they would, for me, take advantage of my skills, my experiences, the things that I knew how to do, that I'd already proved myself able to do, and I thought at the time I could make them into a bigger, more vibrant set of activities. So that was my picture before I started with the Endocrine Society. Right.
How did that initial assessment
How did that pan out? Well, there were some surprises. There were some bumps in the road. Shortly after 2 things happened. Shortly after I accepted the position and told the people at Clinical Chemistry I was leaving. The first was that I learned that the Endocrine Society had renewed its contract with Williams & Wilkins as the publisher of its journals for another 3 years. I was shocked by this because my understanding from the interviews, from the discussions I'd had with several of the officers of the society was that they were bringing me on to take the Endocrine Society into publishing its own journals. So I was a bit surprised, and to say disappointed would have been an understatement. I was very disappointed by this and just shocked that this could have happened. Later on, I learned a little bit about why that happened. The second thing was, before I started, I attended the Endocrine Society's annual meeting. I actually went to observe it. I wasn't starting until August of 1988, but I actually went to the meeting that took place that June in New Orleans, and I was shocked to find that how can I say, how unprofessionally the conference was being run. I looked around and I saw the signs for the sessions being written by the speakers at the sessions. I saw coffee and food being ordered essentially by the members of the society themselves. So it was clear that the operating management of the Endocrine Society's annual meeting left a great deal to be desired. But the good part was it was clear that that was an opportunity, and good work could be done there. Things could become much better, could become stronger, and could be more professional, way more professional. And we set aside some time to do that. So there was one other surprise when I arrived at the Endocrine Society, and that was that they weren't doing their own finances. The Endocrine Society had outsourced all of its financial activities to its landlord, which was the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology, or FASEB. And they were doing the books. I would say reluctantly doing the books, because they were not a willing supplier to the Endocrine Society. They were cranky and hard to deal with, and it was just not appropriate. So let me sum this up. I arrived, the meeting was essentially strong scientifically, but operationally exceptionally weak. The publishing business was essentially on hold for 3 years, and there was no financial structure of the organization. So my work was cut out for me, and it was apparent the first thing that needed to be done was to get the financial circumstances of the society clear. We needed to understand all the revenue sources, all the expense side. So I hired a young woman, Cindy Bowden, to come on, and she became the first financial officer for the Endocrine Society that was actually on the staff. And Cindy stayed with us for almost 10 years and did a great job of building the initial financial structure for the Endocrine Society. I needed to have that in place before I could make any other downstream decisions about changing the meeting, changing the administration of the meeting, or to make the case effectively for self-publishing, for bringing the publishing work on. So we did that. We got the finances straight for the Endocrine Society, and that worked out very well. We then moved to change the administration of the annual meeting.
Well, just a second. How did the society or the various factions of the society respond to your financial changes?
They were largely comfortable with that because they, first of all, they didn't know me very well. I was still pretty early. I made the case effectively because essentially the cost would not be any higher to do it ourselves than to have a group outside doing it. And because they wouldn't feel any problems if that happened. So contrast that to the other two problems. If I got into working on the annual meeting and anything went wrong, the members would feel it. If I got into working on the journals and anything went wrong, the members would feel it. In the finance side, first of all, I wasn't going to make a mistake with the arithmetic. I was just simply changing the way we were doing the finances. So they were comfortable with that change. That was a first change early on. And I think many of the members that I was working with at the time, David Orth in particular, Bill Rosner, another, they were much more comfortable with the fact that they could get from me good, solid information about the finances of the society easily and with confidence. So that built a little bit of a confidence base in what I was able to do. Then I went and took a look at the annual meeting. Remember, I was criticizing the operation of the meeting, not the content. The content was superb. There were some wrinkles with the content, but by and large, just absolutely first rate. So I set aside improving the way the meeting was run. We fired the group that was essentially our contractor that put the meeting together, the one that permitted the members to do the writing of the charts, and we got much more professional outside contractors, and internal staff. I also hired a woman to be my meeting manager, to do the operation internally of the meeting. Somebody I had leverage on, someone who depended on me for their paycheck, and I knew that I could control performance and the outcomes that were going to that needed to happen in order to have this be an effective operating program. So
Who was that?
that was Ann Singer. That was that was our first meetings director, and she stayed, I think, 5 or 6 years, maybe even a wee bit longer than that. So she did very well with the Endocrine Society early on. So we began to built the finances. Now we'd done a turnaround on the meeting, and operations of the meeting. There were still a few hiccups, but over the next couple of years, turned into a very systematic program, and it worked exceptionally well. So I was very pleased with that. So now I had essentially 2 successes under my belt. I had the finance turnaround. I had the meeting beginning to operate more like a professional society meeting. So that was all to the good. So now time had gone by. The contract with Williams & Wilkins was about to come up. The Publications Committee, which did not yet have full confidence that the society itself should be publishing its own journals, thought that the contractor was strong and paying attention. I had to make the case that we could do it better, that we could run this better. And so I did the arithmetic. I showed the deal that we had from Williams & Wilkins. And I showed what the impact of taking those responsibilities on ourselves would be. And I showed where Williams & Wilkins was taking the bulk of the profits from the Endocrine Society's journals and keeping those profits, giving us a royalty arrangement that was not doing us nearly the good that it should be. So I could see this. Now, how? I could see it because I knew what I was getting from Williams & Wilkins, and because I'd had the clinical chemistry experience, because I had run their journal and their news magazine, I knew the math. I knew how to build the financial statements for a journal. So I was able to go into the Williams & Wilkins data. I knew what I was getting from them, and I knew what I could get if I did it myself. And I built new pro forma financial statements. Pro formas are a kind of a shadow financial statement that predicts the future. So I built pro forma financial statements that showed what we would have if we made the change from Williams & Wilkins publishing our journals to ourselves publishing our journals. What would the math look like? It's a stunning difference, a difference that was in the millions for the Endocrine Society, in the millions early, within a year or two, and downstream it would be millions every year thereafter. It was a really compelling case. So I made the case, and I made the case both to the Publications Committee, which reluctantly said it might be worth an experiment, and I made the case to the Finance Committee of the Society and to the Council, which is the Board of Directors of the Society. And to this day, I'm surprised they agreed to make this change, because I'd been there only a couple of years at that point. It'd been, I guess it was just past the 3rd year. Been completely successful with everything I had taken on, but there were still naysayers, because I was this business school guy who was coming in telling them how they should run their professional society. I didn't think of it that way myself. I was just thinking of it as how to run a professional society, like it ought to be run, like I'd done it before. But for some good reason, they agreed to let me take a crack at bringing the publishing of our 4 journals in-house. Now, the publishing profile for the Society is interesting. We had one journal that was profitable, very profitable. It was profitable from several aspects. One is subscriptions. It had a lot of subscriptions. And the other is advertising. It had the potential to get a great deal of advertising.
Which journal was that?
That was the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. We had two journals that just about broke even. One of them was Endocrinology, which is the oldest journal we published, and the other is Endocrine Reviews, which is a review journal we only publish 6 times a year. Endocrine Reviews has a wonderful impact factor, which means that it is very, very heavily relied upon in the endocrine field as being a primary journal. But both of them did not have strong subscriber bases, and neither of them was able to command any advertising because they were both directed at basic scientists. And the companies that serve basic scientists don't advertise very much. So there was no, the only revenue from those two was going to be subscription revenue. It was not going to be advertising revenue. And then there was a fourth journal which was losing money. It was a brand new journal, brand new 2 or 3 years earlier. And so I had to look at that hard and make some...
That was molecular?
That was molecular endocrinology. I had to look at that hard and make some judgments about whether the surpluses from the JCEM journal and the minor surpluses from the other journals were going to be able to pull the weight of molecular endocrinology, which was not making money. But I had thoughts about how that could happen, and we began to get molecular endocrinology at least on the right trajectory, so that each year it was making a little bit more of a contribution to its cost than it had previously. And I think a few years ago it finally was able to break even. But there was a kind of funny exchange which for me was very instructive about molecular endocrinology, because early on I said to the finance committee, and I think to the publications committee, well, molecular endocrinology has been in business for several years now, and it does not look like it's ever going to turn the corner. I'm not sure that it can. So when will we decide not to continue with this publication? And they were shocked. The feeling was that if we stopped publishing this journal, that every author who had ever published in it would completely lose credit for the fact that they had published in this journal. And for that reason, we had to continue publishing the journal, even though it was, at the time, losing us hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I was struck by that, but I took it as a given and thought, well, I'm just going to have to make the money elsewhere. I'm going to have to make this profitable elsewhere.
Now that journal was Bert O'Malley's special journal, wasn't it?
Bert O'Malley was involved in the creation of that journal. Yeah, Brad Thompson was the first editor, and his sidekick, his managing editor, was a woman named Pam Diamond. She was a hard-smoking, hard-drinking Texas broad, and she literally would buttonhole people on the floor at the Endocrine Society meeting and tell them, you're going to be publishing in molecular endocrinology next month. And she got them to publish in molecular endocrinology. Brad Thompson, wonderful fellow, mild-mannered, he had this hellion who was his managing editor, and she was dynamite. I still admire her ability to literally pull the content out of these endocrinologists and get them into her journal. I think that was very impressive. I loved it. So I've got these 4 journals, and we took on the self-publishing, and after about 18 months I was able to do the next set of financial statements, and in fact they came out just like I said they would. We were now making millions from our journals and had the potential to make more. So I went to the council and I showed them the numbers, and there was dead silence in the room. And I said, there should be smiles all around, because I did exactly what I said I would do. I've turned these journals into something that can essentially finance the rest of the activities of this society in perpetuity. And then sheepishly, there were some smiles around the table and good work, nice, glad that happened that way. But there was no, I'm sorry we doubted, which would have been great had that come, but I didn't get that. Later on I got that.
Well, David Orth, who in an interview with Adolf Friedman in 2002, he talked about the reasons why you had trouble with the publications. I mean, there was a reluctance on the publications committee to give up their control of it, and also I guess there was a difficulty at that time with the council making decisions. Would you agree with that? That was what you were running into?
Yeah, I think the publications committee had quite a proprietary interest in the journals. They almost felt like the journals were the most important part of the society, and the journals should live almost independently of the society. And so it was a little hard to change that mindset. And in fact, the council, they were not used to making decisions of that magnitude. The decisions that council was making were more on the science. They are actually invested in different decisions that related more directly to the science, as opposed to the management of the professional society, the management of the endocrine society. So it was a little bit of an uncomfortable fit for council. And then they had me as well, and I, was still a bit of an odd duck for them. A little bit about the way academics and administrators interact is probably worth talking about. I think that many of the members of council, who were all academics, thought of me as an administrator, which in their institution was often their arch enemy. Was the person who was saying no, who was the person who was controlling their budgets or controlling their personnel or something. And there was a natural tension between the academic and the administrator. But in this case, I was their guy. I was their administrator. I was the one who was trying to make things literally better for the council of the society and for the members of the society. I was there to do good work, and I was there to do their work. But it took a long time for them to get past that and to realize that I was really their guy and that I was able to do these things. I think on some level also, and actually this happened once. I had a young fellow who was publishing our journals when we brought them on. Lenny Miller was his name, and I actually brought him over from clinical chemistry. And he was asked by one of the members of council one time what his real job was. And I loved this. I thought, what a microcosm of the way we on the staff were perceived, that we must have real jobs, and that just as some part-time thing, we're running this endocrine society. And that was a big change to kind of get the council to understand that these were our careers, that I was hiring people who were true professionals, who could have worked for Williams & Wilkins or Springer or any of the big publishers, but they worked for them. They worked for the Endocrine Society. I could have hired someone who was working for a conference management firm, but no, they were working for the Endocrine Society. So that was a big change.
Now, maybe now's a good time to ask you about how you go about getting a good staff.
Well, I think you have to have how to get a good staff. This hasn't changed much since I've been at the Endocrine Society, but people come to work for an organization or a person that they see going someplace. They see growth. They see excitement. They see new activities. They see an ability to take on responsibilities. If you can offer someone that kind of an experience in their career, not just their job, in their career, then you can get very good people. And early on, I began to have a good trajectory for growth with the Endocrine Society. When we would take on these new activities, they would be profitable, they would expand our reach. In other words, they'd get to more scientists. When that happened, people began to spot the Endocrine Society as a good place to work. And growth is key to that, because if you stop growing, then there is not the opportunity for new activity. There is a constraint on your ability to spend, to invest in the future, and the quality of people that you get will decline. It's just life.
Okay, so after you had made the changes in publication and taken it in-house, and the 18-month period had elapsed and it had been a huge success, how did that affect your credibility at that point? Had you arrived with the members? Were they comfortable with you at that point?
They were reluctantly more comfortable, certainly, but they still wondered what I was doing back at the office in Bethesda, and what were all of these people running around doing, despite the fact that it was pretty clear to me, and in fact was the case, that they were doing the publishing that had been done by Williams and Wilkins. They were doing the conference planning and so on. So while my credibility improved, I have felt like that has always been a bit of an uphill battle. Now, why would that be? Part of it is endemic to associations, and that's because there's turnover in the officers. They're continually turning over. They're continually being reintroduced to me as their CEO. They're in the position for 2 years, 3 years, and then they rotate off and a new group gets elected. And the new group may have no knowledge of what we have been doing or who this fellow is who's running the Endocrine Society from a staff standpoint. And so there's a continual process, really, and that's true to this day, of reintroducing myself and my staff, your staff, the Endocrine Society staff, to the members who they're going to be working with, to the volunteers. So while I think you develop a certain level of credibility, there's always something new. There's always some new member that you have to address, some new issue that you have to address. You're continually building and rebuilding your credibility.
Now, we could talk a little bit about strategic plans.
Yeah.
What was the strategic plan when you first, or was there a strategic plan in 1988?
No. The word strategy and the word council did not go together very much early on. But we did have a taste of strategic planning, 15 years ago. We had a couple of sessions with a fellow named Roger Watalis, but they were mostly weekend sessions, and they were mostly designed to ask questions about where was the society going and were we able to steer the society, that kind of thing. Mostly posing the question as opposed to developing a plan to do that, to change the direction of the society, or to be more assertive and proactive in directing the society. And how does the council do that anyway? They were unclear about it. So at any rate, we had at least 2 weekend sessions with Roger Watalis over the course of years, but not a great deal changed. For the most part, the work of medicine and research was being done by the members, and I was helping to get the work that they were currently doing out to the audience. That's the way the jobs were set. But in the year 2000, President-elect was Bill Crowley, and he was from Mass General and had had much more personal experience with strategic planning, either Mass General or in some other capacity. And he and I got together to create a good, strong strategic plan. And the first thing that we did was we hired an outside consultant who had been doing this for other organizations that generally looked like the Endocrine Society, professional societies, and some academics. So they had experience with academic people as well as with societies and associations. The company was Cambridge Concord Associates, and the woman was Elaine Kuttner, who led the activity. And Elaine and I became fast friends, and she has worked with us now on each of our 3 in total, strategic plans. So this was the first strategic plan.
And this was a roadmap for the future?
I don't think that title quite does it for that first strategic plan. There were a number of things that came out, I think, in that strategic plan. Let me address it a couple of ways. First of all, the process. It took us a good 8 or 9 months to develop this strategic plan. And not only was the council involved, but a strategic planning committee was built of not only members of council, but members who were very active in various committees. So they were part of the process. And eventually, all of the members of the committees of the society were invited to weigh in on this strategic plan. And finally, it was posted on our website so that all members could weigh in. So this was an effort to get a lot of people who were involved with the Endocrine Society to think about the future of the Endocrine Society and to be comfortable with it. But the real work was done by the Strategic Planning Committee, the staff, and the council of the society. That's the group that worked on it most. So the primary outcome of the first strategic plan was a rebuilding of the governance of the Endocrine Society. And this rebuilding provided a place in the council on the leadership of each of the 3 major constituencies of the society. These constituencies had always existed in the society for the last several years, certainly. And that consisted of basic scientists, which is sort of the parent constituency of the Endocrine Society, which began as more of a basic science organization. It consisted of clinical scientists doing clinical research, and it consisted of physicians in practice, endocrinologists who are actually seeing patients. Now, there are all 3 groups in our membership, but the leadership of the society was much more focused on basic science and clinical scientists, and not clinical practitioners. And yet, the needs of the clinical practitioners were apparent. They needed more programs, they needed more services. Each of the other groups needed more programs and services too, but the group that seemed underrepresented was the clinical practitioner. So those 3 groups were each given a part of the leadership. At any time, at least 3 members of each of those constituents are on the council of the society. And there are a number of at-large members as well. But that change, that formal honoring of the different constituencies of the society was probably the most significant and most lasting aspect of the first strategic plan. There was another aspect of that first plan. This was the first time we acknowledged actively our need for a more active advocacy role. And this was not a formal element of the strategic plan, but a kind of gradual awakening to the fact that we needed to be much more active at NIH, getting funding for clinicians, getting reimbursement for clinical scientists, managing some of their burdens, IRBs and so on. This is the first time the words were said about advocacy being critical to the Endocrine Society. Now, previously, we had focused on our programs, our educational programs that were associated with the annual meeting or our clinical endocrine update, or our journals, or maybe even our news magazine. So these were products and programs you could hold in your hands. Now we were adding a new element to the portfolio, if you will, of the society, and that was advocacy, looking beyond ourselves, looking at how we influence the environment for endocrinologists. That was a big difference.
Okay, so this is the first time with advocacy.
It's the first time we acknowledged it in a formal document, acknowledged the value of it, acknowledged that we needed to be there.
Okay. Now, did you have to change the bylaws in order to...
The bylaws did need to be changed in order to change the composition of the council of the society, which changed quite massively, and over time, over the next several years, the bylaws were changed. We implemented this change informally for a year or two, and then got the bylaw change that we needed.
Okay, what led to the second strategic plan? Taking our place.
Taking our place. Well, 5 years went on, and we were working the first strategic plan very aggressively. We were changing some of the programs of the society. We were enhancing and expanding both our educational programs. Our ESAP products came online. That's endocrine self-assessment programs came online. So many operational activities of the society were continuing, but it was time to refresh the strategic plan. So the two presidents who were actively involved with that were Len Wartofsky and Andrea Deneve. And they and I worked very closely when it came time to redo the plan. So we employed Cambridge Concord Associates again and Elaine Kuttner again. This time it didn't take 8 or 9 months, it only took 2 or 3 months. But we went into looking at this, at our plan and our needs again. The phrase that we used to describe the second strategic plan was taking our place. And that says a great deal, because that means that in the forums, in the environments, in the places where decisions are being made about medicine and about research, we needed to be there. It was a formal decision on the society's part to be part of coalitions, to be part of activities, to weigh in professionally, to testify, to be active in all of the areas, the forums where endocrinology was being discussed. We began to ramp up our press activities, our public relations activities. We created a group that could respond rapidly when an issue was in the newspaper that we needed to, or in the press, in the media, anywhere, that we needed to weigh in on. The Endocrine Society has the experts, and it needs to be sure that we are getting the experts to the places where they needed to be. So this was the concept of taking our place, that we needed to be in the correct places. It also implied a more aggressive advocacy role. And in fact, we did ramp that up. Internally, we had more people who were doing advocacy. We had members who were organized to provide those services, to visit on the Hill, to address the issues of advocacy, that were beyond the staff's capabilities. So this was a very important change when we did the second strategic plan.
How had the society been dealing in terms of advocacy with these different groups, the AMA, the FASEB, NIH?
Yes, we had usually had a connection to them. We attended the FASEB meetings. We had joined FASEB, but we weren't active in doing that. We were connecting with various folks at NIH in the different institutes, but we didn't have a regular connection to them. We essentially upgraded our staff so that we had a stronger, more professional group. We upgraded our consultant. We use a lobbying consultant in Washington, so that was a big change. Previously, we didn't have that set of services.
What were some of the specifics of this plan?
Of the second strategic?
The second strategic plan.
Well, a number of changes were made internally. One of them was we revamped the committee structure of the society. This is a big change. We had 20 or 30 committees of one sort or another, all of them reporting to council. Very flat organization chart, all of them reporting to council. And it meant that the work of these committees was not fully appreciated by council. They had 5-10 minutes to present to council at one meeting or another, and there was not an effective, deep sense of what the committee was doing, and we were treating committees that had a pivotal role in the society, like the Publications Committee, with some other committees that had a marginal role with the society. We gave them all 10 minutes, and we were missing some important activities in the society. This second strategic plan got the correct committees speaking to council for a good period of time so that council could appreciate some of the nuances and some of the subtleties of the work they were doing. For example, we created 6 core committees of the society, and that ranges from the ones that would be obvious, like our Publications Committee and our Education Committee, and it adds others, a Trainee Committee, it adds our Public Outreach Committee, it adds our Clinical Affairs Committee and our Research Affairs Committee. And there's 6 committees that are critical to the operation of the society. It addresses our programming needs and our advocacy needs, and the youth as well in the sense of the trainee committee. So these became the 6 core committees. These became the groups that would present to council. These are the ones who actually had the ear of council. The other committees would report to council in written reports and so on, and occasionally when there was a critical issue, they would present to council. But for the most part, we listened to those 6 committees every time there was an opportunity to at council.
Now, how had your credibility changed at this time, and also, say, the staff? What was happening with the relationship?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Let's address the credibility. By this time, now we're talking, I had been with the Endocrine Society probably 15 years. By this time, I had worked with a lot of members. And for the most part, I think they had respect for my skills, my business acumen, and they also understood that I was their guy, that I was doing things that were enhancing the Endocrine Society's circumstance. And I think when they understood that they could count on me, that I would deliver, and that I was on their side, there was a massive improvement in the way we were able to interact almost all the time. It's still new people, and you're still meeting some folks for the first time or getting to know some for the first time, but Truth be told, now there was a great deal of credibility because the performance had been there. Now, the staff was a big deal. We kept increasing staff because we kept expanding the program aspects of the society. My rule was that when I would have a vacancy in staff, I would try to hire someone stronger than the person who left. It was just my rule of thumb. If someone left, I would try to get someone who had the capabilities of the person who left, plus a wee bit more. Somebody a bit stronger, so that we were continually raising the level of the performance of the staff. But this time, nobody had any trouble understanding that this was the career of the people who were there. I mean, still, you'll find some folks at the lower levels for whom it's just a job. But for most of them, it was absolutely a career. It was a major commitment of theirs to their own personal professional development, and they were using the Endocrine Society as the vehicle for that. That shows. When you have that kind of commitment, that really shows. And I think that there's a wonderful improvement over that period of time, so that we were really able to go to, it's a cliche, go to the next level with our interaction with members. There was one other aspect of that strategic plan that relates to this question. I should have thought to say it earlier, Mike. We developed the concept of staff empowerment. And since you just asked the question about staff, I'm reminded that I need to tell you about that. That concept was to essentially, to use the word, to empower staff to continue to do their job all the time, between committee meetings, at any time. They were expected to use their brains to understand the agenda for the society, to use their brains to move that agenda forward all the time. Not to keep bouncing decisions back to members who are on committees, but for the staff to understand what the members wanted and to keep moving along. So there was not this back and forth. There was much more throughput on the staff. So when you have a circumstance like that, staff sometimes will make mistakes. Staff won't get it right. They'll make an error. They'll assume the members wanted this, and in fact, the members may have wanted that. Then, this is the critical part of staff empowerment. So what do? Do you take the responsibility back from staff? No. Now you tell staff what they should have done differently. And they do it again. Then they go out and they continue to use their minds. And if there's a pattern of failure to be able to understand, then you change the staff. But you don't change the process. The process keeps things moving along. You just get you get better staff, you get stronger staff. Somebody who does understand the agenda, does understand how to move it along, and you put them in that position. So there's some turnover sometimes when that happens, but you really have a much more constant flow of work that's being done. My objective with all of the changes that we have made in the society, all of the developments, all of the programs, is to get more and more use of the content of the members. I want more people, more scientists, more lay public, more legislators, more administrators at NIH to understand what is being done in the Endocrine Society. So the vehicles that I have been using to expand our subscriber base, to expand our media coverage, have the sole objective of getting more and more use out of the Endocrine Society content. We have fabulous content. We have the best content in the field of endocrinology that there is. But sometimes it's in Greek and it needs to be in English. So we need continually to recast our content, to repurpose it, to put it in a form that is precisely appropriate for the audience that needs to see it. We now have a hormone health network, which was originally our hormone foundation, now a hormone health network, which reaches out to the public. The public needs the content from the Endocrine Society. Who else needs it? Most of the endocrinology in this country is not being done by endocrinologists. It's being done on a patient basis by primary care. So we need to have content that is appropriate for primary care. And this, frankly, is the biggest opportunity for the future for the society too. But the philosophy is to get the most use out of the science and the medicine that our members do, and to create vehicles, to create opportunities, to create channels of distribution, to use the business term, for all of that content. That's been the approach. That's been the way of thinking about what we do at the Endocrine Society. On the staff, we don't do content. Members do the content. But our job is the business side of that, which is distribution, getting it in the right hands. Another aspect of the distribution is to engage partners and collaborators. It may be in the interest of the American College of OBGYN or the American Academy of Family Practice or ACP to partner with us, to collaborate with us, to assist in the distribution of this content. If they're going to do that, they're going to want a sustainable model because they'll have to put work into it just like we will. So we're going to have to work through what the revenue would look like so that that can happen. But the revenue should be there. I'm confident that it is, and we'll make it happen.
Okay, so the third strategic plan,
right?
Building leadership. That's
Building leadership.
The phase we're in now?
Yes, that's where we are now. And this is also very exciting. Just a word about these strategic plans in general. They are very motivating. They are very motivating. They clearly help me as the CEO to direct and focus the staff. It really is quite a good instruction manual, if you will. I mean, most of the people here in this office could recite the major directions of the strategic plan easily. And the reason is because we continue to drive it home. We continue to celebrate it. When we have a committee meeting, for example, at everybody's place, there will be a little card, 3x5 or whatever the size is, that has the strategic plan on it, has the key elements of the strategic plan. That's at every committee meeting. And everybody around here knows about those elements too. So what we are trying to do is continue to reinforce the plan, reinforce it with our members. Sometimes members get off a little bit on tangents or their pet projects. The strategic plan is a way to be sure that they cast these initiatives in terms that meet the society's long-term goals. It's really an important structure to have. And internally, the staff likes it because they understand what's expected of them. They understand where we are going and where we're going to be putting the emphasis. So I think in general, having these strategic plans, if you don't just keep them on a shelf, if you actually work them, has a tremendously good effect on staff direction and on morale. And it has also a very good effect in the member leadership too. And here's why. I mentioned earlier that the members turn over all the time. You know, we'll have someone serving in a position either on a committee or in elected leadership for 3 years. The strategic plan has to govern for a longer period of time than that. So when a new person is elected, when a new person is appointed to a committee, we educate them on the plan of the society. We give them a sense of where we have been and where we are going. And it helps them do their jobs as committee members. A lot of committee work is operational planning, planning for our journals and so on. Staff is largely charged with making that work, but committee members get involved with that. And that's not medicine, and that's not research. So the structure of having a strategic plan helps them to understand where we're going. But you're about to get into the third strategic plan, and this one we call Building Leadership. And this was the leadership of Kelly Mayo. He was president of the society and also served to lead the strategic planning effort for this program. And here is how I think of this. I think of the last strategic plan's catchphrase was taking our place. I think of this as taking the lead. I think of this as moving from being at the table to being at the head of the table, to being the people who actually drive the agenda of the coalitions that we are members of, to be driving the political agenda of the American Medical Association as it relates to advocacy, to driving a portion of the FASEB agenda as it relates, for example, to clinical research. We are in a position, we have the credibility, we have the content, we are in a position to be taking the lead, to being in the leadership role. So building leadership was an articulation of that, was a way to say this is the responsibility and we accept this responsibility. Now, saying it and doing it are two different things. You have to do something different in order to assume leadership. You have to prepare yourself for it. For members, that may mean there's training that they need to have. That may mean they need media training. They need to know how to speak to the press, how to speak in a congressional office, how to do testimony. They need that, and we can help them and train them in doing that. It means from a staff standpoint that we have to create the opportunities in these coalitions for our members to seize the day, to be part of the leadership of these coalitions. And it takes time. It takes preparation. It's not something that you can just decide to do and it will happen. You have to be ready. You have to do the preparation. So we have staff who are thinking along these lines. Oh, and another way to think of it is, what is the staff doing to take leadership positions? Sometimes we are taking leadership positions now in coalitions. We can do that. We've got that ability. But it also means professionally. Now, this goes back to the professionalism of the staff in general. But, for example, I was president of the Council of Engineering and Scientific Society Executives. This is part of my giving back to my profession, taking the lead, if you will, in my profession. I was the president of this group. And this is a group of organizations that have operating models that look very much like the Endocrine Society. They publish, they have conferences, they have trade shows, they do advocacy, they may publish standards and so on. Some of them are engineering groups, some of them are science groups, some of them are technology groups, but they all have similarities in the way they operate, and you can learn from them. You can learn that what may work for engineering groups may also work for a group like the Endocrine Society. So it's part of my professional development and my professional contribution, and again, I was president of that group. We have many members of the staff here who are in leadership positions in their organizations. Wanda Johnson, our Senior Director for Programming, or for Education and Meetings, is on the board of the Professional Convention Management Association. Other folks on the staff have similar kinds of roles. So we internalize it. We are taking the lead in our professional societies, our professional groups as well. So this concept of leadership in our third strategic plan, I think, is vital. It will sustain us as we think about what we need, where we need to be, and what places we want to go. It also means that we will have to make choices about the coalitions that we participate in. We need to be participating in groups that we can be effective in and that we can lead. It may mean that we let some of the others go, that we invest heavily where we can have an influence and may feel that our participation in others is not as critical to us. So the leadership issue is critically important. So there are two of the four directions in this last strategic plan that relate to leadership. One of them is building leadership, which means creating the ability to do that, and the other is taking the lead. But there are two other directions. One of them is member value, which means that everything the society does needs to have a discernible value to its members, a clear way to reach out to a significant number of members, no one-offs, important investments that we make. And the other is impact and influence. And on its surface, you can see that leadership and impact and influence go together. That means we need to be in places where we can be influential, where the content of the endocrine society drives the day. Whether it's a debate on bioidentical hormones or bioequivalence or endocrine disrupting chemicals, or the menopause hormone replacement therapy debate, we need to be in all of those places. Those are the debates in the world now, and we need to be there. We have the content, we have the experts, and we need to be there.
Where are those places that you need to be? Are you talking about the NIH? Are you talking about the FDA? Are you talking about the media?
I mean, certainly in the media. I mean, every one of the ones I just mentioned is important in the media. But if we go over them individually, let's talk about the WHI study on hormone replacement therapy. We were there. We were testifying. That's 10 years ago, and we were there for the revisit to that 10 years later, which just happened last year. So that's a forum in which we participated. That one's at FDA.
Now, are you at the table with other groups at that point? You're
Yes.
taking the lead.
Well, we are. You can't just declare yourself to take the lead. You have to earn it. So we are there, earning our leadership role, if you will.
Talking about building leadership, the strategic plan, what's the current status of that?
Well, I think we've made a number of good steps. We have made the sale, if you will, to our leadership. They're comfortable with what they need to do, or that the society wants to assume a more aggressive leadership posture. And I think the staff has the same point of view, but it is exceptionally ambitious. And it requires people to change behavior, to do things differently. They're going to have to actually be assertive in the forums that they are in. They're going to have to be volunteering to be in leadership positions, and they're going to have to earn them. And I think that is a bit of a change for most members of the society. Not that they are not leaders in their own institutions, but typically that has not been asked of them in the endocrine society. So I think it's a reach. I think it's absolutely achievable, and it will be even more achievable if it's fun. If the members of the society and we help them as staff recognize how enjoyable it is to actually define the agenda of some of the coalitions, some of the groups that we are working with. I think it will be empowering and ennobling.
Scott, the Endocrine Society does a great deal of business with industry. How do you manage the conflicts that might arise in that relationship?
Right. This is a question that's on many minds. Sometimes our members' minds, sometimes it comes up in the press, and so on. A couple of issues. First of all, many of our relationships with industry are strictly arm's length. For example, they will purchase an advertisement in one of our journals. They'll purchase an exhibit booth. It's a fee for service, and it's just as clear as that. Some other areas, they are paying a fee to sponsor an event. So there is the area where there is some risk, and I'll tell you how we have managed the risk. We observe no connection between funding of content and the development of the content. There is none. There's an absolute firewall between those two. We keep that completely clean. There is no connection there. So and in doing so, we are observing the requirements of the ACCME, that's the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education. Those strictures are very harsh, very clear, and they involve no connection at all. So we observe that. We state that in our policy. Our policy is there will be no conflict of interest because we won't permit it. We don't permit the connection between funding and content. So by doing that and controlling it, we know what we can do. By doing that, we take the issues of perception off the table. Because once you get into issues of perception, I perceive that you do this or you perceive that we do this, it becomes a chimera, a simple shadow of what truth is. So we don't address that. We simply make our own rules, which are very firm, and we stick by them at all times. We are clear about it, our books are open, and we're very firm about the observation of those rules.
Why did you decide to retire at this time?
Oh, well, as I have told my staff, I either had to leave or I would be carried out. And I chose to go out on my own 2 feet. I think this is a great time for the society. It's really a great time for me. I'm in good health. I have a lot of interests, and I intend to pursue them over the next however many years that I have. And I'll tell you a few of them. I love traveling with my wife, Pamela. We have had a great time doing that, and I think memories are really critical. We've made a point of bringing my 2 kids along. Each of them has either a wife or a significant other, and we love traveling with them. We're good travelers. We work as a team. We get what we need to do done. We see everything when we go someplace. We're on foot. We take public transportation. We're just as aggressive about traveling as we are about life in general. It's great fun for us. So we'll do that. For me personally, I'm still in love with sports cars, and we have 2 Porsches, one of which is a race car, and there's a picture of it over my shoulder. That was before it was a race car, and now it's a race car. And my son and I enjoy taking that to the track for track days. We are not racing that car any longer. It's very old. It's a 1972 911, but a wonderful car. And we have another car that is our daily driver, and that's also a Porsche. So we're city people. We love living in the city and doing city things, but when we need a bigger car, we use a zip car. So we're in as few cars as possible, given the fact that I love cars. So that's part of it. I play a little golf. I'm not a good golfer, but enjoy that with my son and my daughter's significant other. So that's part of the fun. I think there will be some work for me too, and I'm looking forward to having that develop. I may be on the board of other organizations. I've had a few folks address me in terms of counsel that I might give them as a member of their board of directors. I can't share exactly who that would be now, but this is something that's in the works. I also may do a bit of strategic planning consulting. We'll see if that develops as I hope that it does. But let me tell you, I think that the niche for me is because I'm a decent businessman, I'm able to make the operations part for professional societies, maybe that look like the Endocrine Society or maybe in a related field, I can make the case for why a good business approach makes sense, why it permits growth, and all of the benefits that come out of growth. And I think that not all societies know that. They're nervous about it. They feel that this is a reach for them, or maybe it's unseemly. But you know, it isn't. It's wonderful. And when you do develop a good business model that's sustainable, many more doors open to an organization. You get better people, you have more dollars to invest, you can expand your scope, you can expand your reach. Lots of good things happen, and I've been able to sell that, if you will, with the Endocrine Society. I've demonstrated its value, and before that with the American Association for Clinical Chemistry, same thing, and even before that to some extent with the Public Broadcasting Service.
What about writing? I know you had a long-term interest in...
Well, I do like to write, and I think I write pretty well, and I actually have one outline for a book right now, which I'm quite excited to pursue. We'll see how that works. It's quite mundane, but I think it has a certain niche, so that will be fun. And I've developed a kind of way of thinking about staff and motivating staff. And I developed an outline for that called What I Look For. And I think it's pretty compelling, and that, for me, is going to serve as the outline for book number 2, if there is book number 2. But there will probably be at least book number 1.
And what's book number 1?
It will be How to Drive.
How to drive
How to
a
drive.
race car?
Well, it will cover how to drive a race car, but it will mostly be about presence, situational awareness, and how one is present with the vehicle.
What do you think the future of the Endocrine Society might be?
Well, I think it's a bright future. I think it's an exciting time for the society now, an exciting place to be. We're right now, as we speak, upgrading the complete infrastructure of the society. So we've got a brand new vehicle underneath us, or will have within the next couple of months, and this will help all of our transactions. We do 100,000 transactions or so during the course of a year. This will equip us so that we don't look clunky, that we look more like Amazon than we do now. So getting a good feel for changing the society's infrastructure. That's important. I think that's very exciting. It equips us to be able to go to the next set of activities for the society, the next set of operations and programs. We need that basis. Part of it will be a new database that allows us to collect even more useful information on our members about what they do, what they need, and it will also let us collect more information about other people who are going to be using our information, our content, in the future. And the database and all of that infrastructure needs to be in place. So that's all very exciting. Physically, we're going to move. We're sitting here in Chevy Chase, Maryland, but 7-8 months from now, we will be at the corner of 21st and L Street in Washington, D.C., in the row with the other societies that look like us, the major medical societies in this country. And that's very exciting. So we're physically positioning ourselves in the right area of town, in Washington, where the advocacy is done, where the professionals that do the same work that we do all go to work in the morning. So that's very exciting. For the society and its programs, lots of good things on the program right now, or in the plans right now. We are launching Endocrine Press, which is going to be a tremendous expansion of the distribution vehicles for the content of the society. I would have said it's books. Press sort of implies books, but books are only one of the vehicles that we'll be using. A lot of it will be electronic. A lot of it will be presented material, or material that's presented in one place, transferred into a different format in others. Endocrine Press will be the house for all of that, and that's a tremendously very big initiative for the society, and a very exciting one for the society. And that Endocrine Press will meet the needs of all of our constituents. It'll meet the needs of the basic scientist, the clinical scientist, and the clinical practitioner. There'll be something for each of those groups within Endocrine Press, and I think that that's dynamite, that we've got that sort of potential coming on board within the next few months. So that's a big deal. I think it's kind of fun, and we are rebranding the Endocrine Society. Probably soon after you see this video, we will have a new logo, maybe a new tagline. The visual symbol of the Endocrine Society will be changed. It'll reflect our potential, it'll reflect excitement, and it will reflect growth, and hopefully our youth for the next 100 years of the Society's operation. So that's kind of fun. I think there are some other opportunities that present themselves to the Endocrine Society, and I think we'll be taking good advantage of those. Let me give you an example. Right now, about 90% of the endocrinology in this country is done not by endocrinologists, but by primary care docs. And they're seeing patients with diabetes, they're seeing thyroid patients, they're seeing women in menopause or women with hormonal imbalances and so on. It's primary care doctors and associated allied health professionals, maybe nurse practitioners as well, who are seeing patients with endocrine disorders. And we have the content. The Endocrine Society has the content in endocrinology, and yet we're not seeing those patients. There will never be enough endocrinologists to see all of the patients in this country that have endocrine disorders, but we can provide the content that would be useful for primary care and for other health professionals who are seeing patients with endocrine disorders. But as I said earlier, our content is in Greek, and they want it in English, and they want it in a physical format that they can use easily, that they can use in an encounter with a patient, that they can use at their leisure. Those are different requirements that they can use in the right technological format. Is it on a iPad type device, or is it in a handheld device? It's got to be right for each of these groups. So our challenge is to take our superb content, the best content in the world in endocrinology, and put it in a format so that it helps those people who are actually seeing the patients with endocrine disease. Think about the multiplier. I mean, there are probably 250,000 to 300,000 primary care physicians in this country. There are, in a stretch, maybe 10,000 endocrinologists. So the multiplier of our content is potentially fabulous. So we'll increase our impact and influence, back to the strategic plan again. That's an important change there. And we will get more eyes on the work of our members. So a given member who writes a paper for JCEM will now may see a version of that that's written for primary care, that provides the essence that the primary care doc needs to have when he's seeing a patient. And as a business guy, I would also say there's a business model for this, because when you have that kind of an effect, that kind of potential distribution, you know, even if we got 10% of that market, that would be 30,000 deliveries of content. There are people, docs, pharma, others, who are willing to pay to help get that information distributed. So there should be a remuneration that helps us pay for the translation, that puts the content from Greek into English and into the right format. I see this as a tremendous opportunity to expand the influence of the Endocrine Society, get the content of our members into the right hands so that it can improve patient care. I think it's almost, it's a beautiful model, and but it's not an easy model for us because our docs don't usually think in terms of a content that will be useful for these audiences. So staff has to make the bridge. We have to find the writers who can take the content, put it into the right format, put it at the right level. That's our job. Our docs do the content. We'll take care of the translation, if you will. But I think that part of the future for the Endocrine Society, is fantastic, a great opportunity. So I'm very optimistic about where we can be in the world. I think that we have all the pieces in place to be able to do this. We've got the infrastructure coming online. We're physically going to be where we are downtown, can attract the best talent, and I think that we have the content. So it's a matter of getting the content into as many places as it possibly can.
Thank you.